With all the new technology and the abundance of information on the web, you would think that buying or selling or understanding the real estate market would be easier than ever. But ask yourself one question. Now that you've done your homework and you think you know what's going on, what do you do next? Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock on Tuesday, and as you know, every Tuesday at 10 a.m. we do a blog here on our Fournier and Fournier channel, and we try to cover subjects that in depth in a way that you may or may not be able to find on the web. We like to dig into subject matter, and we share our experiences and hopefully get some feedback from you as to some of the problems that you may be having or some of the fears that you're having in terms of your transaction. We try to address that directly and get to it as thoroughly as possible. My name is Stewart Fournier. Before I get started, I'm going to mention today's subject before I introduce myself. We're talking about a very controversial subject this morning that has become very convoluted, in my opinion, based on my experience, and there's a lot of misunderstandings as to how it should be handled, and the subject today is mold in your house. But before I get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Stewart Fournier. I'm an 18-year veteran of the real estate world here in Southern California. My wife and I, Randy, have practiced together for nearly 15 years now, and we cover a multitude of subjects given our background of well over 35 years in the business. We've handled new sales, we've handled new home sales, we've handled 1031 exchanges, we've handled short sales, we've handled foreclosures, we've handled probate, we've handled just about everything related to residential real estate and some commercial, that is multi-units, over the course of our career. And we started this blog because we were kind of frustrated over some of the misconceptions that were being promoted across the web. So this is our little corner of the world in terms of being able to educate you about real estate, and that's the purpose of this blog. So if you happen to catch me right now on the air, you can also feel free to ask any questions about real estate relative to the residential market, and we'll be happy to answer right on the air here. Today's subject, mold. I need to give some disclosures before I get into today's subject, because it does become very convoluted and there can be a lot of misunderstandings. Before I get started, what I'm going to talk about today are some of the experiences or some of the observations. I won't get into experiences, more like observations about what we've seen over the last few years relative to the mold issue, which is an extremely serious issue and can be the subject of lawsuits and a lot of frustration, and certainly a big variable in terms of how it affects a transaction. And that's kind of what I'm going to focus on today mainly, is how it can affect you in the transaction. But before I get started, I want to make the disclaimer that I am not an industry expert when it comes to mold. The information I'm about to give you is what I've experienced over the 18 years that I've been in business, and I'm not claiming to be any kind of a professional related to any kind of chemical reports or anything like that. Again, let me stress that I'm going to say some controversial things, I think, but I want to stress that I'm doing this strictly as a matter of opinion more than professionalism, respective of the industry of mold and how it's handled. Now, what happened many years ago, as many of you may or may not know, there were some landmark cases that were settled that had some huge dollar amounts attached to it, and these had to do with mold in the house, respective of how they affected children and adults, and some huge cases with, like I said before, some really huge money settlements were adjudicated. And as a result, there was kind of a rethinking of how, in the real estate transaction world, how we handle mold. And so as a result, there was some protocol developed, and the protocol is a little bit about, is what I'm going to talk about today. The protocol has been developed. However, In the last few years, there has been a little bit of pushback by the real estate industry because in some ways the protocol that the real estate industry has been dictated to seems a little frustrating, and so there's been a lot of controversy as to the legitimacy of the process and what it actually produces, and basically how it puts a lot of fear into people. So what I'm going to do today is give you an overview of actually how the protocol for mold works, again, as I understand it and has been my experience over these last 18 years. But before I get into the specifics, I do want to mention one thing that I think should be of interesting note, and I'm going to mention it now, and then I'm going to mention it at the end of my presentation today, because I think it has an incredible bearing on how you actually view this whole situation and how it's approached, and that is that there is no government agency that regulates this process. Now, there are laws that are connected to parts of the process, but I want to just stress that what we've discovered over the last few years is that the government has kind of let their hands off of this protocol that we've gone through for many, many years, and there is no entity in the government that you can go to respective of the protocol that I'm aware of the protocol that I'm going to describe. So you have a lot of rights. You have a lot of rights to interpret how that works, and you also, more importantly, and this is the real point that I want to get to, you should, in fact, question just about every step of this process, because the process is designed to protect itself, but not necessarily your best interest. And that's something that I know is very controversial in saying, but again, that's been my experience. So I hope I'm not going off the deep end too much and getting myself in trouble, but again, let me just stress that this has been the kind of thing that we've seen. So let's start from the beginning in terms of what the protocol is, again, as I understand it. Now, what happens is mold, as far as I know, it's been described to me, is everywhere. It's in your house. It's out of your house. It's in your closet to a degree. In other words, spores, as I understand it, are sort of the measurement by which they understand where mold may be, and it's virtually everywhere. Now, what becomes an issue, of course, is obviously how much. And how much that is affecting your health. And that's an extremely and dedicated concern by most mold professionals, and that's really what they're looking for, is in the end making sure that you're healthy. So what usually happens in a real estate transaction is if a mold expert comes in the house, they will find mold on some level somewhere in your house. The most common place, of course, is usually underneath the sinks, underneath where there's any sort of water source. Now, that's an important point. If you have existing mold in your house, in your closets, underneath the floor, underneath the sink, it's as a result of moisture. There has to be a moisture source for mold to basically expand itself and find its way in different crevices. So the first thing that the mold experts do is they come into your house and try to determine, first of all, where the mold is by getting different readings of moistures in your walls or where it's suspected that it is. And this kind of gets to be a little controversial because, as for example, if you have drywall, chances are if you don't have a moisture source, it's going to be a negative reading. But if you have slate, or if you have old material outside of drywall, the dampness of some of that drywall can actually give a positive reading. So that's just one thing. Probably pre-1978 houses have a lot of that, and so that gets to be very controversial. Again, I mention these things only because you are entitled to question them, and that wherein this process takes place. Now, when there is mold identified in the house, what ends up happening is that you get a mold expert to come out. He identifies the mold, and then he will create a report that will tell you to what degree the spores within those areas are multiplying or potentially where they're coming from. But the mold report stops there. In other words, the mold report simply states the obvious in accordance with the testing that they take. Then what has to happen is a separate company needs to come in, because obviously you want to clean the mold up at that point. A separate abatement company, a remediation company, comes in and determines, or it gets as best they can, a good idea of where the moisture source is that's creating the mold, and will give you an estimate as to how they will therefore then either contain the mold and then clean it up, and then they will have the mold company come back and verify that there's no further mold in the locations that were identified. So that's a two-step process. And by the way, mold companies, just as an aside, it's been told to me, these companies, if they are both the mold company and the remediation company, it's been told to me that that's kind of a conflict of interest. You should not have one company doing the same two tasks. And I won't get into the specifics behind that, because then this video would go on forever, and we don't want to do that. But I will tell you that if you get a mold report, make sure that your remediation company, that is the company that's going to come out and actually remove the mold, are two separate companies. Again, this is not government regulated. It's just the protocol by which companies basically protect themselves. Now, the mold company, the remediation company, and the company that actually comes out and then fixes whatever damage was done as a result of the fact that the remediation happened, that is to say that they actually went in and took out the mold. They may have to take pieces of your wall out. They may have to take your sink out. They don't fix it. The remediation company simply takes the mold. And so you're going to get a charge for the fact that they've taken the mold out and they've taken it and contained it and done all the things that they need to make sure that that mold goes to a location that's certified and covered up and everything else, so that there's no exposure whatsoever. But then they do not replace any damage that they've done. That's another step, and that's another charge. So in terms of the amount of companies that are involved, you have the mold company, you have the remediation company, and then you have the company that's going to come back and actually fix the work that's been done on your house that's damaged. So as you can see, it's a very long and involved process by which you have to certify that professionals in the industry have said that that they've attended to whatever mold issues that you may have. Obviously, with many things nowadays, nothing is guaranteed. It's just stated basically that they've attacked the issue and they feel that the issue is solved. So that's where the interpretation becomes a problem for us in real estate, is that no one will say for sure, no one will dictate for sure that you don't have mold in your house. And that's understandable. You would have to have some readings throughout your house 24 hours a day for someone to make that kind of a statement, and that's just obviously impossible. So I guess in closing today, what I'd like to stress is, for you as the buyer or the seller, understand that this is something that you want to work very closely with your realtor on, in terms of who they pick, what kind of companies they pick, what the process is, and an absolute understanding of what the actual causes are, and an understanding of what the real cost should be to fix, alleviate this problem. It's very time consuming, but it's time well spent, because it can be an extremely expensive proposition. Sometimes we've seen instances where there was simply a mold reading that was very light underneath a sink, and we've seen companies try to take advantage of that and just basically state that there's mold throughout the house, and they have to, in my opinion, unrealistically test every corner of the house as a result of some mold that was underneath the sink. And obviously that proposition is extremely expensive, and I've seen it not work itself out in that it's turned out there's not mold, there wasn't mold anywhere else in the house. So again, not telling you what to do, but telling you to be very cognizant of what that process is. always double check and make sure that you're not being taken advantage of, because there are a multitude of companies that are out there, because I'm going to get back to the same point that I made in the very beginning, because it's not regulated by the government. Now, for those of you that hate government regulations, I'm right up there with you. But here's an example of an industry that, in my opinion, to some degree, has a lot of characters in it that are not necessarily working in the best interest of the homeowner, because the homeowner is a one-time client. In other words, the homeowner is probably not going to use that particular company again in the next few years, if not decades. And so when you become the subject of a service that's probably only going to be used one time, I'll let you figure it out from there. And yes, there are many companies I've experienced personally in my house as well that come out that have no real background, have no real education, and are just simply tearing your house apart. And there's no reprieve unless you can prove it, and that's just timely and consuming. One last note about this, and I'll close it out a little bit. First of all, if you have any questions about this right now, please feel free to ask me right in the comments section underneath this broadcast, and I'll be happy to answer it. Or any questions about anything not necessarily related to today's subject, happy to answer any questions. But the one last thing I want to mention about this is to protect yourself as a seller when you run into the mold situation. It's really important for you to simply disclose all the things that you need to disclose relative to whatever moisture source is there. That protects you. As with all issues when you're selling your house, absolute full disclosure is the one thing that will always protect you. And if you're a suspect of the buyers coming with a mold company that you may feel may not be legitimate, bring your own out. It's worth the money, because mold, again, is a four-letter word, certainly in the legal profession, that can cause a lot of problems. So when those issues come up, number one, work with your realtor very closely. Number two, make sure that you comb through all those reports to get a really good idea. And number three, pull those companies on the rug, and make sure that they're explaining to you in detail and it makes sense to you. Okay. All right. So that's my sermon about mold today. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We do this every Tuesday at 10 a.m. I'd love to hear from you in terms of the subject matters you'd like me to cover. We are on for a short period of time. We tear the subject matter as closely to the bone as we can, and I truly enjoy doing this. So please feel free to comment and let me know what I can talk to you about directly in terms of what a problem you may be having, or sorry about that. Automated world, we get phone calls right on the screen now. And happy to help in any way we can. As always, please make sure that you take advantage of an app that we provide at Fournier Fournier, and it's called the Fournier Fournier app. What this app does, it's really very exciting, is it allows you to take a picture of any house in America, any house in the country you're driving by, and if you simply take a picture of that house, this app will allow you to get a value of the house. It'll allow you to get a value of the houses around it. It'll tell you the last time the house was sold. It'll give you a marketing survey. It'll tell you about the schools in the area. It does just about anything any other app does that is relative to the real estate world, again, just by taking a picture. And the app is extremely easy to download. Just give us your email address. We send it to you. You can use it. And the most exciting part of this app, of course, is that you'll be able to talk to us directly once you take that picture. Again, we won't see you on the app as you're using it, but you can actually ask a question right on the app itself, and it goes directly to Randy's phone or my phone, and we'll be able to talk to you directly about that home. No obligations and no obligations just for the information. We certainly don't charge for it, and we'll be happy to help you and answer questions anytime you want. So that's a great direct connection to us. We are, as everybody else, is extremely easy to get a hold of via text or telephone number. Happy to help you with any of your real estate needs here in Southern California, specifically the beach areas. We're located in Manhattan Beach. We service Manhattan, Hermosa, Redondo, but we also do service the West LA area with a great deal of experience in those areas as well. I won't even tell you all the areas we've actually represented in because as a result of a form of business, we have the ability to do that. We're a little unique in that regard. So wherever you are, please feel free to ask questions or inquire, even if you're out of the state. We have a referral network for that as well. So again, 10 o'clock on Tuesdays. We hope to see you next week, 10 o'clock Tuesdays, everybody. Bye-bye.